Morning. What we're looking at today is our pre-use inspection for our harness. This is part of your daily checks that you need to do prior to climbing. So the first thing we need to do when we come to a harness is look at the very quick indicators. Number one is the tag in place to say it's in date for inspection. The second thing we need to check then is the user label to make sure it's legible and intact. Underneath here to make sure we've got all the things we have in it, our serial number, our date of manufacture, all our compliance, etc. Need to make sure that's legible and nice to see. So those are two very quick indicators to see what to look for. After we've found those, we then go through the process of looking at the different component parts within the harness. What we look at is metalwork, so D-rings, buckles, adjustable buckles, and then we also have our fabric or textiles, in which case it is webbing, and then finally the last thing we look for is our stitch patterns to make sure that they're whole and complete. So things to look for, you can look at it either as a complete harness or you can break it down to component parts. Personally, I like to start at the back, the rear D-ring, pick the harness up, look at it visually to say it looks okay, physically it's in shape, there's no obvious glaring breaks or damages to it. And then I start to look through, checking the D-ring, checking to see if there's any cracks, corrosions or deformation. Moving the sleeve out of the way to check underneath as well. Looking right through, coming down through the harness, I come through to make sure that the label, that's the fall indicator, has not been deployed. I come through to the adjustment buckles, I lift them up, I move the webbing out of the way to look underneath it. I also run my little finger underneath the buckles to make sure there's no sharp edges or any swarf or corrosion which might have happened during manufacture. I check underneath for the webbing, running my fingers along the webbing as well to feel for things, because sometimes we can see things, sometimes there's small bits of metal or swarf stuck in there, we might feel it and not see it. So I run my hands down, make sure I can feel it. Coming through this D-ring, checking again for cracks, corrosions, deformation, again moving it around, looking underneath the webbing where I possibly can, checking on both sides of this stitch section that's here. The stitching is a separate colour to the webbing, so we have a silvery grey webbing and a black stitch pattern. Slightly more obvious on this one, as you can see it there. I need to make sure that we check, where possible, both sides of the stitch pattern to make sure it's whole, complete, it's not frayed or worn or distorted. As we're coming down, we're looking again at both sides, running my thumb over to feel the webbing, checking through. I pay particular attention to the leg area of the harness because these are the points where we move around, we could scrape against stuff, but also it's important that during climbing, if we ever do take a fall, all our impact goes into the leg areas of the harness. We need to pay particular attention to make sure that they're nice and secure and safe. Checking through here, again, looking at it, we can't see the back side of this webbing because of the pad, so we can only look at the outside. Coming through, again, using my hands to look through, checking both parts of the stitch pattern to make sure that nothing is frayed or worn. Coming through to this side, next to my leg buckles. What I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to check to make sure that they actually function correct. So I look at the buckle itself, I look at the webbing underneath it, quick run of my fingers, make sure there's nothing obviously damaged or glaring, and then I put it in, give it a good pull to make sure it's secure, and then with these, they need to be a double action to open the buckle. When I put it in and click, if I press one side, it shouldn't open. If I press the other, it shouldn't. It should only open with both items pressed at the same time. Once I've checked the buckle, I like to leave it closed because that reminds me that I have actually checked that buckle while I move on to the rest of the harness. Coming through. It takes a bit of time to do this. It is a process, but it's very important that we do it. I get around to this side of the harness, checking again underneath, the webbing underneath it, checking the stitch patterns. You must remember that this will have been inspected into service, but we do need to check it every day as well. So we have our waist webbing, waist buckle I should say. Again, quick check, make sure it's whole and complete. A functionality test to make sure it's correct. On this side, checking underneath this buckle, checking the adjustment to make sure that these buckles actually work as they're supposed to. But again, if the buckles don't work, we can't just say, well, they're set to my body, I don't need to do them. They need to function correctly, so we need to make sure they're actually working. Round to this D-ring as well, checking it, make sure there's no cracks or deformation. Make sure we're doing both D-rings, following the webbing along. Obviously, this harness has a plate on it, so we can't see the back, but we can check where we can up to that point and test it. These items here are gear loops and our bolt bag holders. These aren't safety critical, so if you do see any damage or wear to these, it's not a fail for the harness. This is purely for attaching equipment, and they will come away at around about 30 kilos. So remember, we must never attach our full rest or safeties to these items. Coming on up to the front then, slowly making our way up to the chest, checking underneath this one, checking the adjustability of the buckles, making sure that they work. We'll pull our little adjuster stop right there. A little bit of dust from use, but it's all fine. Middle one up. We then get our chest secured. Check that buckle functions perfectly well. Check the stitch pattern on both sides, and of course check the front D-ring to make sure it's nice. There's no deformations, there's no obvious crackage or damage to the material. There's no discoloration to the webbing, there's no obvious signs of staining or chemical damage or UV degradation. Visually everything looks fine, so I know my harness is good to use for the day.